Now. Ba ba ba. Yep, we are. Okay. Good, good, good. We're recording audio. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go through this paper, and slowly we are going to drop my gummy butterflies. The breakfast of champions here. We're going to slowly fix it. Okay? Oh, hey, people have trickled in while I was doing that. That's good. All right, so up first, so this student did put their last name and page number in the header here. This is the header, by the way. We have to differentiate between header and heading. I know, close-sounding words, but header, heading. So they put their name up here. This all needs to be in one line, though. So I'm not sure how that actually happened with that extra line, but we'll just go ahead and put last name. Also, put a space there. Make sure you don't have it like this. Make sure you have a space. Okay, name, my name, class, the due date. Again, this is excellent. This is the correct format for the due date, right? You want 19 and then the month and then the year. Or you don't want 19. You want the day it's due. Anybody notice what's missing here? Yeah, we have no title, right? So we definitely need a title. And the title is actually super important. This is the first way that I'm going to interact with your paper, apart from my scan of formatting, is I'm going to see your title. Your title should definitely tell me something about your paper. It should give me a very good idea of what the paper is going to be about. And, yeah, so you certainly need one. Let's keep looking. Now, there's another thing to note here when we're looking at these spaces. So this is it could be an artifact from downloading this from where it was submitted on Canvas, but it's also, students do weird formatting stuff sometimes. There's 3 spaces here, and we don't want that. Let's go look at the end of this. Are there 3 spaces after all of the sentences? There are. Okay, so easy way to fix that, right? So what we want to do, we'll put that back. I'm going to hit Command F, but you can do Control F if you're on a Chromebook or on a PC. And then I am going to look up here, and I'm going to click on, you may not be able to see it, it's kind of small, this little search box here, and I'm going to hit Replace. Okay, and then what we're going to do in the Find, we're going to hit space, 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 and it's going to find all of them for us. And then we're going to hit 1 space here, and then we're going to replace all of those. Okay, so 61 replacements. So now we're done. Great. Let's go back up here. And now we have fixed that issue. So we're just going to put a placeholder title here. But, yeah, don't do weird spacing. Okay, let's do a quick visual look through. So what I'm doing when I scroll through here is I am looking at, where the paragraphs are located. I am looking for in-text citations, and I'm looking for other little oddities. There's a double space here, isn't there? There is. We'll do that one, but there may be more of those. If there are, we'll fix it. This is an oddity I would notice, right? Underlining. Underlining is an artifact from sort of the era of handwriting when you couldn't do italics. And so we don't want to underline things. We want to italicize journal names, not underline them. Of course, if you're writing, you can't do that by hand. But let's keep scrolling. I am seeing a lot of quotes at the beginning. This one couched in a sentence. That's good. I'm seeing some rhetorical signposting right here. So good. Right here, quotation mark and period. The period's outside the quotation mark. So this is confusing, I will admit. But the period goes inside the quotation mark. When you put the punctuation outside of things is the parentheses. So if there were a citation here, then you put the period outside of it. And that's just, look, I didn't design this formatting style. That's just MLA being MLA. Right, okay, scrolling down. This is looking good. I do want to make a comment right here, just because I noticed this, and I'm just going to comment on Okay, this is another double space. So we're going to do this again, by the way, if you wanted to see that process again. We're going to do the find and replace. So find, and I'm going to do space, space. So there's 50 of these, and then I'm going to do space, and I'm going to replace all. We don't want double spacing. We don't want single space or triple spacing. Only single space. Did you ever, how many of you learned, just a quick show of hands, to double space after a sentence? Is that something they're still teaching? Ever? Okay, no, that was in the typewriter era. Double spacing after a sentence was the norm. I mean, I guess to show that there was a sentence break, but because we have such higher resolution on things now, we don't really need that. Okay, but now we're back here. We found that again. Okay, this is where we were. Look at this concluding sentence right here. It is far too common for players to get concussions. Now, this is not a great sentence. We can tighten this up, but it is a good concluding sentence. You can see how there might be a paragraph where we have information about concussions and their frequency and how we might end up at this conclusion, right? This happens too much, okay? This is the kind of thing you want to be looking for in your paper for concluding sentences. They can serve a couple of functions. Sometimes you want to put a really punchy end on a paragraph, right? So the reader gets all this information, but instead of them having to process it on their own, what do I do with this? It ends with, this happens too much. It is far too common, right? And then you go, okay, now we're ready to move on. The other ending you can do is a more transitory, like I'm gonna set up a question for the next paragraph, but this is a good thing to do. So good job, last name. Okay, let's keep going here. This is an odd artifact right here. It looks like this could be something from downloading, but it looks like we missed a new paragraph there. Yeah, I'm guessing there may just be some art, because some of these mistakes are odd. Like, noon. People don't do that really. All right, keeping on. That was a strange artifact too. This has been converted from something to something else. All right. I'm not seeing a lot of in-text citations. That's a problem for me. And by in-text citations, we'll have to read it more closely to really see if they belong. But I'm talking about this right here, like author name and then page number, right? I don't see very much of that. And so my suspicion, just from my initial scan of this, is that the information from sources was probably used a little bit loosely. Like, a lot of research was done, because I know the process this student went through, right? A lot of research was done, and then an annotated bibliography was produced, and then they went to write their paper, but they had kind of learned this stuff, so instead of referencing back to their sources, they just kind of wrote it out from memory, and then to use their sources at the beginning, because they wanted to check that box off, they have a couple of quotes, right? And that's not the way that we want to be using sources, right? We want to be using our sources to support our arguments with specific examples, with exact page numbers, with these in-text citations. That's how we really want to be using our sources. And this is all stuff that we can do in revision, right? We can do this while we're revising. We can do it while we're writing too. But it's good to be able to do it while we're revising, to go through and say, okay, I'm actually going to pull out my annotated bibliography. I'm going to connect my source and my page numbers with my actual information. And speaking of sources, let's look at the works cited page. We've got a lot of, okay, so issue 1 here. We don't put citations there. We want to do works cited. So I'm going to center this text. Do works cited. And then also you'll note there's no hanging indentations. So I added that. That's from me. And this is not in alphabetical order, right? So works cited page should have the sources in alphabetical order by author last name. And needs to have hanging indentations. And there's a number of formatting issues here. One of these issues is that you can't cite Google. Google's not an author. I mean, they do produce some things, right? And You can cite Google if it is something that Google has produced. But most of the time what you're going to be getting from Google is not what Google, the company, has produced. You're going to be getting what Google, the search engine, has scraped from a website and then shown you, right? Even when you Google something and it comes up with a little answer from Google, that Google didn't produce that answer. Google scraped that answer from the web. So you can't really cite Google except in some rare circumstances. And so here we see too, sports-related concussions in youth from Google Books. So in this case, Google Books is actually does this link still work? Maybe. Not anyway. Okay, so if we are citing something on Google that we got from Google Books, Google Books is a host. It's not even the original publisher of this book. It just hosts books, right? And so we can cite it as the mechanism by which we got it, but we would want to cite the author and the actual book itself, which we can do even by looking at the ISBN. So there's a website, Cite by ISBN, CITE. I'll just type it here really quickly. It's if you just go to Google and type in Cite by ISBN, it will pull up a website, and then you can copy and paste the ISBN number in, and it will cite that source for you. Do you guys know what the ISBN is? If you look at the back of a book on the barcode, then it's usually got a bunch of digits beginning with 978. That's a classification system. And so because it's an exact classification system, you can cite using that classification system. So just plug that into Cite by ISBN, and it will pull up all of the relevant information for you, and you can cite that. It's just a useful tool to have for books. It's a book-specific thing. And if you access something on Google Books, but you can't find the ISBN, go search it on Amazon, and then do a Command F or Control F and type in ISBN, and it will take you down to the ISBN. There will be two. One's called ISBN 13, the other called ISBN 9. I believe you want ISBN 9, which starts with 978. Usually. Sometimes there's different numbers, but one of those two numbers will work for that citation. Okay. Great. So we know there's issues with the citations. We know there's issues here with the formatting of the works cited page. And we know we're probably missing some in-text citations. So those are problems with this paper. But on the whole, we haven't really gotten into the actual text itself yet. So let's start with the introduction right here. And let's just read this through out loud and see what we have. And if, by the way, if you have questions at any point about what I'm looking at for here or anything about this paper, let me know. Okay. Brain injuries are a risk to long-term health and wellness. While the scale of these injuries can be minor or severe, one of the most common types of mild brain injuries are concussions. There are many types of activities and accidents where sudden impacts to the head can lead to brain injuries, but contact sports is an area where concussions are a high risk and can be prevented. Awareness of mild brain injuries and concussions in particular is growing in America, but there are still too many risks taken with children's activities. Adolescents are the group that is the most at risk for concussions, according to the Journal of Athletic Training. Concussions, period. According to the Journal of Athletic Training, sports are second only to motor vehicle accidents as a leading cause of brain injuries for people ages 15 to 24. Parents, medical professionals, coaches, and athletic trainers have a responsibility to protect young athletes from these types of injuries. The concussion protocol that athletic organizations put into their policies are a good start, but more needs to be done to protect youth. The federal government should improve concussion safety by establishing a National Youth Sports Committee at a national level that mandates safety standards for all youth athletic organizations in the country with the support of a medical review board. Okay. There is so much right going on in this introduction. There's a lot of sentence level things that we need to fix, and there's a lot of ways that we can clean this up and make it, we can focus on brevity a lot here. But I think that the first thing we need to acknowledge is from a surface level view of what this author is doing, I think this makes sense. And for an introduction, and I read a lot of bad introductions, this one has a lot going for it. It's very clear in terms of its focus. It's limited in terms of its scope, and it has a specific recommendation. And so even though the title is missing from this piece, we didn't get a title. After the introduction, I know what to expect from this essay, and I know what to be looking for. This is also going to be a red flag for me if anything falls outside of this scope, right? In our rush to pursue finishing a paper, sometimes we include stuff that is sort of tangentially related, but not necessarily relevant. We've got a very limited scope here, right? So if I'm saying what is the scope of this paper right now, I'm looking at this and I'm saying we're going to be talking about sports health in general, in youth, more specifically. Even more specifically within that sort of container, we're going to be looking at head injuries. Within those head injuries, we're going to be looking at mild head injuries, in particular concussions. And then with the recommendation that we need a federally mandated protocol for health for youth sports, right? Which is, by the way, as a fun little factoid, do you want to know why cheerleading is not considered a sport? Because there's like a cheerleading lobby, an organization, and they lobby to make sure that it does not get counted as a sport. Why would they do that? I hadn't actually thought about the betting side of it, but that's interesting. What I do know is that one of their motivators is because cheerleading is exceptionally dangerous, and there are already rules in place for what you can and can't allow children to do. And basically, it would, the things that you do in cheerleading would have to change if it fell under those same rules and regulations. So, the debate over whether or not cheerleading is a sport appears as though you're talking about sexism at first, but you're actually talking about the ability to, mangle children for the sake of pageantry. Hooray, youth sports. I don't know, performance event, they do competitions, right? But, I did competitive theater, and I don't think anybody's angling for that to be called a sport. I will give myself a butterfly gummy for making fun of myself. There we go. Okay. Let's talk about this sentence, because this is one of the hallmarks of student writing that I really want to, if I can convince you of anything or convince you to focus on anything, it's stuff like this. And I say student writing, I should expand that now to include both student writing and clickbait articles, right? Both have this feature in common, which is these kind of the sentences that sound like they are saying something but are actually not. The scale of these injuries can be minor or severe. It's a scale of injuries going from not serious injuries to severe injuries. I don't think we needed that information, right? Like, this has the structure of a sentence that is giving us information, but if we look at the semantic value, who does not know that injuries can either be minor or severe? Right? Assuming our audience is literate adults, which I think is, we should have a narrower audience than that. But assuming our audience is literate adults, we don't need to tell them that injuries can be minor or severe, right? Injuries can be injurious, right? We don't need this at all. Brain injuries are a risk to long-term health and wellness is a much better sentence, right? But this doesn't add any information to us. We don't learn anything from this sentence. And so if we are attempting to reduce the total number of words in our sentence or in our paper, we can go ahead and just delete that entirely. So now we have brain injuries are a risk to long-term health and wellness. One of the most common types of mild brain injuries are concussions. So we'd have to look at the rest of the paper before we could make this next decision, but assuming we're going to be looking specifically at concussions throughout the whole thing, and I can see this actually, I have a hint here, we'll talk about it in a second, then we can probably take this word concussions, brain injuries, including concussions. are a risk to long-term health and wellness. Right? Now, we have lost one piece of information. Does anybody know what it is? In deleting those two sentences, there's one little piece of information that we're missing. I'll eat a gummy while you think. The only thing we're missing is that they're common. That's it. That's the only thing we've deleted, is that concussions are common. And so I want to just take that, put it in a little box, set it in the back of my head, because if I'm not mentioning that concussions are common somewhere else, then I'm going to have to include that information, right? Brain injuries, including concussions, are a risk to long-term health and wellness. There are many types of activities and accidents where sudden impacts to the head can lead to brain injuries, but contact sports is an area where concussions are a high risk and can be prevented. So this is another, this right here, sentences that begin with there is or there are. These are called expletives, not the fun kind, right, that let drivers know that they're bad. But it's just called and I don't know why it's called an expletive, but it's called an expletive, right? And some people consider this a false subject, right? And kind of a false subject and a weak verb, right? Because our subject is there, and our verb is are, right? So what happens, we're going to end up deleting all of this, but we can just take this. What happens if we start with many types of activities and accidents where sudden impacts to the head can lead to brain... Many types of activities and accidents result in sudden impacts to the head that can lead to brain injuries. Okay, so this sentence is already improved. And again, we're going to get rid of it entirely because we don't need it. But it's already improved because now activities and accidents is a better subject than there. Right? We've improved it by making it more specific. If we were trying to save this sentence and keep it here, we might want to make our subject an actual human being, right? Like, young people frequently injure themselves or, whatever. But making it a real person, because the more anthropomorphized or the more human our subject is, then the easier our sentence is to understand. Usually, we're in the realm of art here, so it's not like we can make prescriptive statements like that, but as absolutes. But as a general rule, having a real human character is going to improve our ability to understand the sentence. That said, knowing that many types of activities and accidents result in brain injuries is not the point of this paper, right? It's like if you were reading a recipe and it was like many things that you could add to this soup would add flavor to it. However, these are the flavors that we are going to use, right? We don't need that first part. We can go straight to the ingredients. So let's just delete all of that and go to contact sports directly, which is good because that's where we are going to be limiting our focus, right? We've read this paragraph. We know that's where we're headed. Contact sports is an area. Now, this I think is actually correct. It sounds wrong because you've got this S, contact sports, and you expect R, but we're referring to contact sports collectively as an area, so I think is correct, but you could argue it either way. Is an area where concussions are a high risk and can be prevented. So we're going to pack more of this into this first this first sentence, right? Um, So, brain injuries in contact sports, specifically concussions, are a preventable risk to long-term health and wellness. That's not very clear. Okay, that's better. So, yeah, that's better. Let's talk about the information that I've moved back into this first sentence. So we got rid of the second sentence already. Context. We've moved contact sports up there, so we can get rid of that. We're losing the word high here, but we've already got the word risk. And then prevented we've got there. So we've taken this first 3-4 sentences and gone down to brain injuries in contact sports, specifically concussions, are a risk to long-term health and wellness, but they can be prevented. Now, if our entire paper is going to be about concussions and not other brain injuries, which I believe it is, concussions in contact sports are a risk to long-term health and wellness, but they can be prevented. This is true of all sports generally, but if we're talking about youth sports, because we're talking about federally mandated rules then we probably want to include that word youth here. Again, we are narrowing our scope, and because this is already pretty narrow, but we're allowing our introduction to reflect how narrow our scope is. And then also we've discovered a title. Right? You see how by taking away redundancy and by making our sentences more efficient, we're increasing clarity. I feel like I've got an extra tab in there too. Yeah. There we go. And we're going to capitalize all of our major words. Concussions in youth contact sports. Concussions in youth contact sports are a risk to long-term health and wellness, but they can be prevented. Awareness of mild brain injuries and concussions. We're not talking about mild brain injuries anywhere else. Awareness, I deleted of concussions in particular. We've gotten rid of the thing that we had. Awareness of concussions is growing in America. Let me back up and do that really quickly again to show you exactly why I deleted what I deleted. Okay. Awareness of mild brain injuries and concussions in particular, right? This is what our actual focus of our paper is, right? And we've gotten rid of earlier the mild brain injuries thing. We're just focusing on concussions. And so when we delete mild brain injuries, we also don't need in particular, because we've gotten rid of the thing we need to be particular from. Is growing in America, but there are still too many risks taken with children's activities. Okay, small complaint here. Nobody is ever going to actually. I think this is the only time you're going to hear about this in your university education, probably. I don't like it when people use the word America to talk about the United States of America. America is the name of 2 continents that are host to lots of countries. And I understand that the United States of America is, hegemonic with our massive nuclear arsenal we could use to destroy the world literally hundreds of times over because, we had to have a phallus measuring contest with Russia. But I'm going to have to clip that before I put this online. But I think this is kind of egocentric and nationalistic in a negative way. I think in the United States or in the U.S. is better. I think the actual best term was Frank Lloyd Wright's use. Was it Frank Lloyd Wright? Usonians. It's probably going to tell me, oh, it's got it in there. Look at that. I love this term, Usonians, but, we'll just do in the U.S. Referring to Americans from the U.S. as Usonians, I like a lot, but it never really caught on. Anyway, sorry for that distraction there. But there are still too many risks taken with children's activities. Great. So these first two sentences now they're so efficient, right? Concussions in youth contact sports are a risk to long-term health and wellness, but they can be prevented. Awareness of concussions is growing in the U.S., but there's still too many risks taken with children's activities. I might actually want to swap these two ideas, that there's too many risks taken and they can be prevented. So let's see what that looks like. I don't think that looks as good, does it? Concussions in youth contact sports are a risk to long-term health and wellness, and there are still too many risks taken. Oh, look, we found another one. Sorry. Do you guys remember what we said this was called? The expletive, right? So we can get rid of it. And too many risks are taken with children's activities. This still doesn't work as well, though. I'm not sure if we have messed this up or if we have revealed that we don't need something. No, I think we just need to go back. Yeah, I think that's better. We can still fix this, though. But too many risks are still, if we want to keep that word, still taken with children's activities. Okay. That's fine. By the way, I'm using, to go back here, Command-Z, or on other computers a Control-Z. This is something that you should definitely be doing when you are revising, going through and moving stuff around to see what it looks like, and then going back with Control or Command-Z. You also can, if you want, save different iterations of your paper, right, to get, if you're really going to be doing some heavy moving around and you don't want to mess up the draft that you've got. And the reason for that is because sometimes you really have to put something in place to look at it before you can know one way or another. So that's a useful tool to have for you. Adolescents are the group that is the most at risk for concussions. These words right here don't add anything, right? Adolescents are the most at risk for concussions. According to the Journal of Athletic Training, sports are second only to, we've got another weird tab there, motor vehicle accidents as the leading cause of brain injuries for people ages 15 to 24. So I have an issue with this quote here, right? So if we say adolescents are the most at risk for concussions, that's something that, like, how do you know that? Right? How do you know? And my assumption is that there is a source that says that, right? But here we have a quote from the Journal of Athletic Training saying that sports are second only to motor vehicle accidents as a leading cause of brain injuries. Is that information from a source? Yes, it is. Does that support the claim that was just made? No, it doesn't. Right? How do I know that adolescents are the most at risk? It's not from that quote. If I need to see, I need to see one of my sources, like the author's last name and the page number, where I can get this actual information. But I don't here, right? Instead, I've got unrelated information looking like it is a just now, and it could be too that what this person is saying is it is most important to avoid concussions for adolescents because they are in school, their brains are developing, right? I'm just like making an assumption here about like how important young people's brains are, right? Old people's brains are basically calcified and useless, which is true. But this may be something like that, but I don't know. Okay, I don't know. Now, I would never, ever, on a freshman paper, on a first-year writing paper, even probably for undergraduate or early graduate work, ever say this is plagiarism. If you keep going in college, this is at the very least unattributed information. This is stolen information, right? So where did this come from? And that's really important. There's a lot of money in universities, right? And in education in general. The people who teach and the people who do research don't get that money. And so the currency that you have when you research, the only way to turn your research into money for yourself is through promotions and things like tenure. And that comes through attribution and citation. And so when we misattribute, it's kind of like, it's like not tipping your waiter, which I realize if you're not from the U.S. is probably pretty normal because the other places pay a living wage. But it is, depending on the case, unethical, and it is certainly very rude. So make sure not to do this, right? So this would be, this is a flag for me, like this is an issue, right? The relationship between these things. Does that make sense how I'm saying this quote, this use of a source does not support this claim whatsoever? Okay. So we're just going to, flag that. That's an issue, right? Parents, medical professionals, coaches, and athletic trainers have a responsibility to protect young athletes from these types of injuries. Actually, that's true, and that's a position that someone can take, right? So let's just delete that. And I think that first, yes. What did you say the final word total is going to be? I want you to be under 1,500. So anywhere south of that, you can end up at less. If you're like, I bet I can pare this down to 900 words, like, great. But you've got to get below 1,500. It can be a shorter. Oh, I had this other question that was a good one. Just to let you know, if you don't have to include all 15 sources, if you have like 2 or 3 sources where you're cutting information and you're like, this source doesn't fit anymore, you can toss it. That's fine. 15 sources in 1,500 words is a lot, right? And so you don't have to necessarily do that. Parents, medical professionals, coaches, we just read that. The concussion protocols that athletic organizations put into their policies are a good start. But more needs to be done to protect youth. So we can see a pattern here, a kind of sentence pattern that's repeated here, right? This is a threat. Awareness is increasing, but we need to do more. This is a threat, but we need to do more. So there's some double duty here that I think we can go through and cut more of this and recombine this some. I also, and again, as we start removing things and looking at this closer, there's a conceptual issue here, right? If we're saying that this group of people have a responsibility to protect young athletes, then why is our argument focusing on this group of people? So I'll pause the recording here. I actually probably won't. I'm just gonna let it run. Which group do you think is responsible? Is it parents, medical professionals, coaches, and athletic trainers, or is it the federal government? Is with who? Anybody gonna say like federal government? We need laws. It's a tough sell, right? Because like, what are you gonna do about the Olympics? How do you make an Olympian? Right? For something like gymnastics or ice skating, you just have to abuse those kids for a long time, right? You don't get to go to school. You have to train all the time, which is exactly the kind of decision that a 6-year-old is prepared to make, right? I'm going to dedicate my life to this. Yay! I'm being mean today. I'm sorry. But yeah, should parents and coaches be allowed to ruin kids' lives? I mean, I think so. I think they should just be allowed to mess up their brains and their bodies forever, destroy their knees and hips by the time they're 13. I'm down with that. But it actually is a tough call, right? Because these are the things that we know do happen. Right? This definitely happens. The stuff in we have kind of two branching areas where we know it's really bad. We know that serial subconcussive hits in football and serial concussions in football, which is the biggest culprit, is a major issue, and that it impacts a lot of male youth, right? A lot of guys play football. A lot of guys put on that helmet, and then they hit it really hard against other helmets over and over and over again. Happens a lot. Okay? And we know it leads to all kinds of problems. And then on the other side of that, if we look at women's sports, specifically gymnastics and ice skating, as the two biggest issues there, although there are others, this also happens in ballet a lot. These young girls are starving themselves to the point of putting off puberty because the frame that you need in order to do some of the stuff that they're doing is this ridiculously thin and essentially prepubescent frame, right? And that helps. This is why there's a ban on how young you can be to compete in the Olympics in gymnastics for women's gymnastics, right? The rules of the event are such that being younger and having a younger body is better for what they're scoring you on, right? And so there are systemic issues here that are related to this, but I don't think anybody's saying we need to ban gymnastics, we need to ban ice skating. I mean, some people probably would, but I don't think that's the case, right? Or what about, let's say, just to complicate this issue further, what about other areas of abuse? Can you raise your children in a way that's psychologically abusive? Can you raise your kids to think that, like, the boogeyman is in their closet, and if they do what you don't want them to, the boogeyman's going to come eat their guts, right? And then you build a whole institution around convincing them that the boogeyman is going to eat their guts, and you talk about other people who had the boogeyman eat their guts and show them boogeyman gut-eating videos, and then you get a costume and go into their closet and you wait for them, right? And then like they're going to you disobeyed your parents today, and you pretend and like terrify them. Would that constitute child abuse to you? I mean, what about telling your kids they're going to be set on fire for all of eternity because they don't do what Jesus says? I mean, is that substantially different? How so? I would rather a boogeyman eat my guts, just like devour my body and painfully, and then be dead, than be set on fire for literal eternity. So which one is more psychologically abusive? And if the government says you're not allowed to be psychologically abusive in this way, and yet there's a substantial portion of the population that believes this is literally what happens, then should the government be able to outlaw religion? Well, that doesn't sound right. But you see how it's complicated. And so there's a fundamental issue in this paper that's revealed when we start looking at it and we start trying to revise it. Is it parents, medical professionals, coaches, and athletic trainers, or is it the federal government? And in fact, we do have a whole paper right here. Right? We could make the rest of the paper about this. But before we know which of these we need to keep, because I think what we either need to do is we either need to delete this, or we need to delete this. Whoops. Right? One of those needs to go because they're at direct odds with one another. They're fundamentally opposed. So one of them needs to go. But we don't know until we read the rest of the paper and decide what the actual conclusion is. My guess is it's going to be the federal government, is what the paper is arguing. Even if, this is what we think. It doesn't matter, right? We just have to make sure that the paper is internally consistent, right? We want that internal consistency. This, by the way, and I said this at the beginning and I meant it, this is a good introduction. Even before we did anything to it, it's a good introduction. This is a good start. This is the level that I expect first-year writers to be writing at, first-year writers in a collegiate program to be writing at. I don't have an issue with that. This is also the level at which many people, even people with terminal degrees and published authors, draft. We often draft contradictions like this. We don't. It's really hard to write a clean first draft that's clean. I don't just mean in terms of arrangement and style and things like that. I mean, and grammar. I mean in terms of the logical consistency, the internal consistency. When we look at it and start revising and taking pieces of sentences and putting them in other places so we get rid of the redundancy, that's when those contradictions begin to show up. Because before we do that revision, there's so much stuff in the way that it just kind of, the sound of it, the melody of it, is sufficient to get us to ignore that, right? It sounds very convincing. It sounds reasonable. This sounds like an intelligent person wrote it. And so we don't pay attention necessarily to the actual semantic value of the individual sentences. When we do the revision, though, we see it, and we see that there's a fundamental contradiction in two parts of this introduction. And that contradiction is something that we have to address. Okay, now I actually am going to stop recording. And look, it went the whole time.